for joining us today in celebration of the Santa Fe Trail anniversary, 200th anniversary. We have Charlene Garcia Sims here to talk to us about tearing down silent walls and finding a voice for Josefa. I'm going to turn it over to Charlene now. She will fill us in.
Thank you, Megan. As Megan said, my name is Charlene Garcia Sims, and I'm the Genealogy and Special Collections Librarian here at Rawlings Library. I was asked to do a presentation on the Santa Fe Trail because this is the 200th anniversary. I decided to do it on the women of New Mexico, so here it goes. The title of my presentation is Tearing Down Silent Walls, Finding a Voice for Josefa Jaramillo, Kit Carson's third wife, and this is a research project in progress. And you'll notice a little blank square at the left-hand side of the screen. And I will talk about that later, as well as the Colorado Humanities logo. And so this is a picture I took from inside Josefa Jaramillo's house in Taos. So this is really looking out from Josefa's home in Taos. And I just imagine her kind of sitting maybe in a rocking chair, rocking one of her babies. Now, where were the women? In the book, Nuestras Mujeres, published in 1992 by El Norte Publications Academia in Albuquerque, New Mexico, edited by Tay Diana Robledo, she asks this question, ¿Y dónde estaban las mujeres? And where were the women? She further states that there is a wall of silence when you search for the literary and historical heritage of women. In addition, when books are written about women or their diaries are published, seldom are Hispanic women included. Few could read or write, so any diaries are almost non-existent. Their struggles and triumphs are part of U.S. history that needs to be captured in order to have a true picture of American history by telling her story. Their ancestors arrived in 1598 or 1692 in New Mexico, and this was a Spanish period between 1598 and 1821. Oñate established the first settlement in Española, New Mexico in 1598. In 1680, the Pueblo Indian Revolt exiled the Spanish colonizers to El Paso. They returned in 1692 with Diego de Vargas and were there to stay. In 1810, the independence war from Spain started, and by 1821, Spain lost the war, and what was Nueva España became Mexico, of which New Mexico was in the northern border. It was known as the Mexican period from 1821 to 1848. 1821 was a very important year because this was also the opening of the Santa Fe Trail for trading with the United States, which had been illegal. How did this research project begin? Remember I said that there was a Colorado Humanities logo on the first page? Well, when the Colorado Humanities came to Pueblo to offer grants for research projects, I wrote a proposal to write a paper about the historical women of New Mexico in order to break that wall of silence and tell her story. As I started my research, I found out Josefa Jaramillo, Kit Carson's third wife, was my cousin. My proposal was to start with her because she was married to such a famous man, whether you look at him as a hero or villain. I was always very interested in the cross-cultural marriages that took place in the New Mexican period of New Mexico. Not much has been written about the women in these marriages, albeit a small percentage. My connection to Josefa Jaramillo is our common ancestors. Francisco Montes Vigil I married Maria Jimenez y Francisco. And I did, I think, about 11 generations of my own and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of hers. And the kinship is where my great-great-grandmother, Dolores Varela, meets up with Josefa Jaramillo, and they were fourth cousins. So that makes me 4 cousins, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations removed. And so we are cousins. These women were born, lived, and died between 1810 and 1894. They lived under the Spanish flag between 1598 and 1821, the Mexican flag 1821 to 1848. And when I say 1598, I mean their ancestors, and the American flag from 1848 until they died. In 1821, the Santa Fe Trail opened up. William Becknell was the first American welcomed by Mexico into the Santa Fe trade. It had been illegal to trade with Americans, as I said before. And Becknell returned to Arrow Rock, Missouri with the profits of his venture and dropped the hard coin on the cobblestone street. The ringing of the coin was like the opening bell of the stock market. A new era had begun, the Mexican era that would last until the conquest of the area by the U.S. and ratification of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. And I love the the comparison of when you drop the coin, it was like the opening of the bell at the stock market. This was by Dr. Sandoval. He always used to say this, and I thought it was just really interesting. I can almost hear that noise. The Mexican period and the opening of the Santa Fe Trail changed women's lifestyles, values, and desires. You know, there were so many new products coming from the East, just something as simple as makeup, where they used to have to go out to the natural plants and to make their rouge, you know, or their makeup. You know, they now were able to just buy makeup in little bottles or whatever they sold them in. The foreign trappers, traders, and travelers altered their lives also because many of them married them, and this were intercultural marriages. Also, cohabitation and common law marriages were customary and socially acceptable. Intermarriages in Rio Arriba County between 1821 and 1846, and this is west of Taos. Of the 122 marriages recorded by Rebecca McDowell Craver, 89 were church sanctioned and 33 were common law. The women represented 58 different Spanish surnames. Most common were Trujillo, Lopez, Lucero, and Tafoya. The men came from Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, Ohio, Illinois, and Maryland. Some came from England, Scotland, France, Ireland, and Germany. 273 children were born from these unions. Statistics state that only 3% of the women married los extranjeros. But yeah, you know, we have 273 children who were born from this unions. I think that's really interesting. What was the allure? The men, you know, physical attraction. The women were beautiful. Cultural acceptance if they wanted to stay in New Mexico to trade and, you know, whatever other business they had. There were many opportunities. If they married a woman from New Mexico, their social status rose. They had economic advantages. They had links to powerful Hispanic families and legal advantages such as citizenship. If they married a Nueva Mexicana woman, they became citizens. The women, probably physical attraction, maybe, as companions. The children raised by the mothers assimilated into an Hispanic culture, though, because they taught them the Spanish language, is that mostly what they could speak. The wealthy Hispanic families like the idea of having an extranjero as a son-in-law. When I say extranjero, I mean the Anglos from the East, and extranjero means stranger. And there weren't that many rich Hispanic families, but there were enough that pretty much ran the political agendas. The couples, the men ate tortillas, atole, and chile colorado. They trapped and traded and tended stores, tilled wheat and corn, made whiskey and farmed. They were carpenters, gunsmiths, coopers, and saddle makers. They smoked, gambled, went to fandangos, built homes, and raised families. The women prepared the tortillas, atole, and chile colorado. They washed clothes, wet the floors to keep dirt down, mended adobe, helped with the milling and farming, were hostesses, nursemaids, midwives, and mothers. Los extranjeros, los norteamericanos. As I said, this is what the men from the East, I probably will call Anglo-Americans. Did the men marry for love or land? This is very controversial, and a lot has been written about this. The women were independent. They went to fandangos, bore babies, and raised families, often by themselves. They were married, but often led unmarried lives because their husbands were gone so much of the time. Of particular importance, very important, is that under Spanish and Mexican law, the women inherited a lot of land. Many of the men benefited from this status. It can be shown that many of the immigrants, Americans, it's strange to call the Americans immigrants, but that's what they were at the time, who became economically and politically successful in northern Mexico, which is what it was, even though New Mexico was part of Mexico. Between 1821 and 1846, were married to local women. 10% of these men acquired land, 8 million of best acres. One of the men was Lucian Maxwell, and that's another story for another time. The Mexican-Anglo intermarriages in New Mexico, 1821 to 1846. Borderland literature of the Mexican era abounds, with references to marriages between Anglo newcomers and native New Mexican women. But these accounts are invariably brief, often taking the form of an aside or an incidental notation. And this is a quote from Rebecca McDowell Craver, who did a study on the marriages in Rio Arriba County. One couple was Kit Carson and Josefa Jaramillo, who married in 1843. She was almost 15. He was 33. This was not unusual. They were married for 25 years, but really, if you count the time they lived together, it was only 8 years. I left a blank space on the first slide of this presentation because this is where I used to put this young woman who I thought was Josefa and everybody in the world thought was Josefa. This picture has been used so many times in so many books, but about 2 or 3 years ago when I went to the Kit Carson Museum, the curator gave me this piece of paper where it says, "It has been discovered that the photograph thought to be of a young Josefa may not be. The accepted conclusion that the picture which represented Josefa as a teenager was mistaken. If the photograph represented Josefa at the age of 12 or 13, the image would have to have been made in 1840 to 1841. There were daguerreotypes being made at that time, but photographs were not taken prior to the Civil War. We believe the image to be a photograph, and thus it's not Josefa." And this is who we all fell in love with as a young Josefa, which is, very sad. And I'll be talking about another picture of hers, who we thought it was her. And it may be, but we'll see. Maria Polonia Vigil was Josefa's mother, and Francisco Jaramillo was her dad. Very nice looking couple. He was not wealthy, but her family was pretty well to do, and that was very important in the story of Josefa. In December 1943, Cornelio Vigil and Saran St. Vrain petitioned Governor Armijo for over 4 million acres of land. The petition was awarded on January 2nd, 1844. It was huge, as you can see at the top right-hand side. And we're going to visit Bogsville, which up where it says Los Animos is about 2 miles south of there. But Cornelio Vigil was Maria Ponolia's brother, making him Josefa's uncle and godfather. Cornelio was also the uncle of Romalda Luna Boggs, Josefa's niece, and Saran St. Vrain was Romalda's godfather. Bogsville, about 2 miles south of Los Animos, was settled on Romalda's 2,040-acre share. And a lot of the time that I write about this, it's like a chess game, or some kind of game. There are so many players, and in different presentations, I have presented it like a chess game, like a game of chess. So this is a quote from Louis Geraud, an author. "Her style of beauty was of the haughty, heartbreaking kind, such as would lead a man with a glance of the eye to risk his life for one smile. I could not but desire her acquaintance. The dress and manners of the three ladies bespoke a greater degree of refinement than usual." He was also talking about her sister Ignacia and her niece Romalda. But this is the other picture that we don't know if this is Josefa or the wife of a military man in Fort Garland. I fell in love with this picture also. Her eyes just haunted me, her cameo. I could swear this is one of her children. And so we don't know yet whether this is her or not. And so we can only hope for the best, because this is who is in my heart as Josefa. But I'll get used to it if it isn't. This may be the only picture we'll ever have of Josefa, and this is in front of the Kit Carson house in Taos. This may be 2 of her children, and she's holding on to a carriage, and it is believed that this is her. I don't think that's Kit. I don't know who the man is, because I see a mustache, and I don't think I ever remember seeing Kit with a mustache. But again, we're still skeptical about so many things as far as the pictures. As I look for her voice, I also want to find something personal about her or the women that I'm writing about. And again, this could be Josefa up on the top left-hand side. This is her hat. She loved to garden. This is her dress. And there are many other dresses that I have taken pictures of that were hers. And then you see the personal items such as her hairbrush, her purse, a little mirror. And so once again, the young girl on the bottom, that's not Josefa, and the woman with the baby could be Josefa. So the mystery remains. There's a description of Josefa by her niece, Sadiona Bend. Rather dark complexion, very dark hair, large bright eyes, very well built, graceful in every way, quite handsome, very good wife, and best of mothers. And R.J. Alexander, a soldier from Missouri to whom Josefa served dinner, she loved to entertain. He describes her as a fair young Spanish lady, height about 5 feet 4 inches, weight somewhere around 110 pounds, black hair and eyes, very pleasant countenance and features. So one describes her dark, one describes her fair. And then her son describes Josefa was a motherly type who relished being a stay-at-home housewife, tending to her maternal duties in the manner of Hispanic women. And this is, like I said, her son, Kit Jr. She was a seamstress, and that is her sewing back on the top. And Josefa liked to sew and was an excellent seamstress. Kit gave her imported material for her wedding dress and would give her a piece of cloth after the birth of each child. After he returned from a financially successful trip from California in 1853, he bought her a Singer treadle sewing machine. This is in the museum, but it's not the one that he bought her, but it's a very good replica. In real estate, Hispanic women kept their own property and any wages earned and had distinct legal rights and retained their maiden name. Real estate records show that Josefa owned 3 lots in the Taos area. In Kit's will, this was left to their children to rent. And it says, "It is my will that some 2 or 3 pieces of land lying in the valley of Taos, New Mexico, the titles of which are in my wife's name, be rented from year to year and to the benefit of my children." And Kit didn't read or write, so this was witnessed and written by dictated to J. Fitzgerald and Dr. H.R. Hilton, who was with him when he died. And Kit would he was able to sign his name, C. Carson. But she owned land. These are her shopping habits and as a hostess. And again, I tried to find her voice or feel what she was like. The family kept a running account in Peter Joseph de Tevis' store. A memo shows her purchases as boys' boots, a boy's coat for Billy, linen handkerchief, a pair of lady kid boots, and a hoop skirt, calico cloth, and French dress goods by the yard. Tevis watched over the family often when Kit was gone. A man by the last name of Doak, Captain Doak, spoke Spanish fluently and sat with Mrs. Carson, who was delighted to take a lesson from him in English. She was very flirtatious with many of the things that I've read. She laughed pleasantly at the mistakes she made in pronunciation and comprehension. She entertained by singing Spanish songs and accompanying herself on the guitar. So we know that she sang and she played the guitar. And this is actually Josefa's voice. I did find it at least once. In 1862, a friend of Kit's wrote him letters on her behalf. She stated, "Little Teresina, Carson, goes to the convent of San Jose daily opposite your house, where old James Quinn used to live, and learns very quick. Shortly, a convent for boys will be established. Charles and Kit will go there." This is another story. One day, some youth stopped by looking for Kit. Josefa saw a young Navajo boy on a horse crying. She was told that he was a captive and they were going to kill him because he would not stop crying. She asked what they would sell him for. They said a horse. She exchanged one of the horses for the child. He would become part of their household until he was grown. They named him Juan Carson. She must have been very independent to just, sell Kit's horse and give Kit's horse for the child. In fiction, In Death Comes for the Archbishop of Willa Cather, which is a classic, she devotes one chapter where she has a conversation with Bishop Lummy. Josefa is described as with that quiet, unabashed hospitality, slender with drooping shoulders, lustrous black eyes and hair. Could not read, but intelligent, cheerful, sense of humor. In the New Yorker on October 9, 2006, an article appeared, about Kit. And it says, in dictating his memories, Carson left out more than he told, nor did he mention the 3 children he'd already had with Josefa. They would have 5 more. In fact, Kit Carson mentioned Josefa only once in his autobiography. This is her Taos home, and this is where the museum now stands. And I can just see her walking around her kitchen, with all the pots she has up there. She has a chilarista on, hanging. So I can almost feel her presence. This is in Rayado by Cimarron, New Mexico, and this is where one of the huge Boy Scout ranches is. But this is the ruins in 1949. The one on the bottom, I'm not sure when that picture was taken, but it's also the ruins. And this is the museum today as it looks. It's really beautiful out there. It's just gorgeous. And this is her when they lived in Fort Garland, the quarters there. And you can almost feel her touch, with the doily on the table, the candle, the curtains, the little pitcher of water. And of course, this is Fort Garland today. And these are their children. William was born in 1852. Kit was born in 1858. Charles in 1861. And Josefa's first baby, Charles Bent, was born premature and died as a baby. 2 years appear for his birth, 1849 and 1850. So she was already 20 or 21 when she had her first child. This are the girls. Teresina was the oldest girl. And then Rebecca was born in 1864, Stella in 1866, and Josefita in 1868. Josefa died when Josefita was a month old, and they all had tragic lives. Teresita lived a very very normal life. And this is Bogsville, where they lived, their last place of where they lived. And this is Kit and Josefa's home, and the remains today. And a few years ago, I heard that they're going to rebuild it, but I don't know what the status is. Bogsville is just beautiful. The best time to go is in March when the avenue of the trees is so full of new leaves. And it's 2 miles south of Los Animas. The women of Bogsville. The women of Bogsville shaped the settlement in numerous ways. Most important, it was their claims to the land that made the settlement possible. The Jaramillo women with their portion of the Vigil St. Vrain land grant, and Amachi Prowers, a Cheyenne with her Sand Creek claims. She married John Prowers, a young trader. Bogsville is a tapestry woven by the women who lived there with the threads of family and land. And this is Amachi Prowers, and this is inside her house. It's a 2-story house, but she built it in her native way, so where the sun would come in on certain doors. But this actually is looking out one of her doors. And she did not like wearing American clothes. She talked about hating the corsets of, she's wearing one here. And one of the first times she did go to St. Louis, she tripped. She tripped on her because of her clothes. So she always did not like to wear those American clothes. In an attempt to make reparations to the Cheyenne and Arapos after the Sand Creek Massacre of November 29, 1864, the U.S. government gave a 640-acre parcel of land to each of the survivors. Amachi, her mother, and the Prowers' 2 oldest daughters were each given tracts along the Arkansas River, on which, along with other Cheyenne lands, her husband, John Prowers, ran his cattle. And I do have Amachi's voice. Amachi, as someone asked her a question and wanted to shake her hand. Mrs. Prowers, do you know Colonel Shivington? Ignoring his outstretched hand, she looked him straight in the eye. No, Colonel Shivington, I should. He murdered my father. That is her voice. Ignacia Jaramillo Bend is very intriguing to me. I want to do a lot more research on her. She was married to Charles Bent of the Bent's Fort, and of course he was the governor in New Mexico. And she was quite beautiful. The article here, this is when they found her picture. And here's Louis Geraud again describing her. Sadiona Bend was quite handsome. A few years since, she must have been a beautiful woman, a good figure of her age, luxuriant raven hair, unexceptionable teeth, and brilliant dark eyes, the effect of which was heightened by a clear brunette complexion. And a shawl was given to her by her husband from Manila. And that shawl is in the Levita Museum, and it has a story of its own. But one of the things I want to mention here, the way the men wrote, it was just as if they were objects. They always talked about their teeth and their eyes and their complexion. It was just, I found it really strange. Romalda Luna Boggs was a daughter of Ignacia, niece of Josefa, wife of Tom Boggs, and stepdaughter of Charles Bent. Josefa, Ignacia, and Romalda were in the Bent house when Charles Bent was brutally murdered January 14, 1847. Their uncle Cornelius Hill and their brother Pedro were also killed in the revolt. They were all heirs to part of the V Hills St. Vrain land grant that Bogsville was parceled from. Eventually, Romualda and her husband Thomas would end up raising most of the Carson children. The voice ended. In 1868, duty called one more time, and Kit went to Washington, D.C. He was very ill. He sent word he was coming home, and Josefa persuaded Tom Boggs to drive her in the carriage to meet Kit. She was in her last stage of pregnancy. 2 weeks after giving birth to her 8th child on April 27, 1868, Josefa cried out to Kit, "Ven acá, come here." He went to her side, and she said, "Kit, I am very sick." Then she died. He died 1 month later. There's a real sad story of two of the boys. I think I can't remember which of the boys, but when they went to see him as he was dying, he gave them 2 hats, which I kind of equate to 2 sets of hats. And they were so happy, but as they were crossing the river, one of the boys, the wind came and his hat blew away. So that's really sad. But it was always, he was always talking about his hat whenever he was interviewed. Kit and Josefa were buried in Bogsville, but Kit left in his will, requested that they be taken to Taos and reburied, and they were, and they are buried in Taos, side to side. About a year later, after they died, they were taken there. So why did any of this matter? According to Dr. Bonnie Clark in her thesis, she says, I realized I had a story to tell, a story that didn't talk about class or ethnicity in the abstract, but rather would examine this women through the lived experience of real people. Although I wanted to research all women at Bogsville, the net was too wide, so I chose Amachi Ochini. Born in a teepee and buried next to the largest headstone in Los Animas under the name Amachi Prowers. And Dr. Bonnie Clark has come and has spoken here before, and I really would like to have her back one day. And this is how I feel. The stories need to be published. I chose to look for the voice of Josefa Jaramillo and write about her and the women who entered cross-cultural marriages, because not a lot has been written about them. Most things that have been written have been from the perspective of men. I believe these women were part of her story and should be told, and not just the elite women, but the others from that 3%. They left descendants who still carry an Anglo name, but are culturally Nuevo Mexicanos. Furthermore, this research will produce new information, insights, and interpretations in the humanities pertaining to Colorado and New Mexico. I want to capture many of these women's characters and their humanism. And this is Billy Carson and Kit Carson III. Descendants of Kit and Josefa Carson live on. I love this picture. It's taken by Paul Maloney, I believe. And we are 8th cousins. This is John Carson and me. And John has portrayed his great-great-grandfather, Kit Carson, at Bent's Fort many times. And he was a teacher, a wonderful teacher in Lahana. And I think he retired. And I'm hoping that he's still doing a lot of historical presentations. And some of my sources were literature reviews, research, interviews, the Cragen papers, vital statistics, birth, marriage, death, census, wills, land grants, the book Impact of Intimacy by Rebecca McDowell, Kit Carson and His 3 Wives by Mark Simmons, and Josefa Carson, a genealogy book by Maria C. Martinez. So if any of you have any questions, please call me at Rawlings Library. And I hope that many of you will help to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the Santa Fe Trail. Thank you for listening.